Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the launch of Offsite for Everyone. My name's Ian Heptonstall, and I'll be your chair for the morning. I'm a director of an organisation called Action Sustainability and the Supply Chain Sustainability School. For those of you who are not aware, the Supply Chain School is a collaboration of over 100 major clients and contractors in the construction industry, with the aim of developing a more sustainable built environment. We launched in 2012, and since 2012 we've been helping suppliers and people within the industry build their skills, mainly around sustainability. But from 2015 we developed a section of the school which focused on modern methods of construction and offsite, neatly named the Offsite Management School, where we were focusing on managers in the construction sector and professions within the construction sector, and what we needed to do differently as a result of Offsite to accelerate the rate of uptake within the school. Today is a culmination of about 18 months of development work by my team with funding from CITB and the support of many of our partner organisations to develop a whole range of new training. And that new training is specifically aimed at 6 functions within the construction industry, and those 6 functions are key people, key functions within the industry that we believe need to know more about offsite. So when fundamentally where they're challenged with, right, we've got an offsite job to do, what do I need to do differently within my role? So as we go through the morning, we'll explain what training that actually is. But let me just set out the agenda first of all. Really delighted to say that we've got a keynote presentation from Mark Farmer, who many of you will know, and many of you read on various media and on websites and what have you. Mark's championing the offsite agenda and modern methods of construction and how do we do things differently. After Mark's keynote presentation, we'll be having a roundtable discussion, and I'm really pleased to say that we've got a great panel for you on that roundtable discussion, where Mark will be joining that panel, but we'll also be joined by Emily King of Mid Group, who's the Client Solutions Director, Alex Gosney, Head of Procurement within the infrastructure sector of Lang O'Rourke, and then also Oliver will be joining us from Barratt Developments as well. So a really good selection on that first panel for you, where we'll be looking at the adoption of systems and of offsite systems in various different sectors. You'll be pleased to know you got a chance to ask questions throughout using the chat function, what have you, but we'll also be using a tool called Menti, and more of that in a moment, where you can participate and ask questions directly. We'll then have a short break, chance to stretch your legs, rest your eyes from being glued to the panel for 5 minutes or so, and then we'll move on to a second panel discussion, where we'll be joined by 4 leaders within the industry who will be talking about closing the skills gap in offsite. So I'm joined by Joe Dide, who's a business manager at Build Offsite, by John Hanscom, who's a partner at Akerlof, Charlotte Hale from So Modular, based down in Wales, and Dominic Coyne, who's a director at Build Space. So we've got a very busy day for you. That will take us through to about 11 o'clock. And then, as many of you know, we've got taster sessions, which are scheduled throughout the day, and you can book for those taster workshops. You'll be receiving an email if you haven't already booked for those workshops. You'll be receiving an email coming through on your internet very soon into your inbox. So what have we got in those taster sessions? Well, from 11:30 through to 12:15, we've got a session for designers, offsite for designers, guest speakers from Hawkins Brown. Then at 12:30 we've got offsite for construction, offsite for procurement, where we've got LHC as a client perspective on that. Then we're moving on to offsite for QSs and for cost consultants, and that's 1:30 through to 2:15. Guest speakers Alex Times from Alinea, and then we're looking at logistics and the challenge of logistics, and that's from 2:30 through to 3:15. Then we move on to project management, and many people have said to us, if the project managers don't get it right at the start, that can often squash the opportunity for offsite. That's 3:30 through to 4:15. And then finally we finish off, and finally, and not by no means least, we'll finish off with offsite for site managers. So what do site managers need to do differently if they're tackling an offsite solution? And that's from 4:30 through to 5:15. So you see, we've got a very busy day for you all, and hopefully you'll be able to book onto those sessions with the link that we sent through to your email whilst we're speaking this morning. So moving on, one of the first things I would like to touch on is many of you said to us, well, what do we mean by offsite? And when we first started the Offsite Management School, we had many sessions, and many greater than the good were sat around a table trying to define what we meant by offsite. And should we call it offsite? Should we call it construction industrialization? Should we call it design for manufacture and assembly? Should we call it modern methods of construction? And since then, we have moved on, and we called it offsite. But when we've been developing these materials, very neatly, we've borrowed from the best, and we've used and embedded throughout all of our learning and the modern methods of construction definition framework that you see on the screen in front of you. And for those of you not familiar with it, you can find it in our offsite library. You can just Google it. You'll get lots of copies, lots of information on it. But it gives a really clear and common language. That clear and common language when we're talking about offsite and modern methods of construction is really important. So we're not just talking about full volumetric, we're talking about 3D systems, 2D systems, pre-manufactured components, additive manufacturing, even lean construction processes all fit within the hierarchy of modern methods of construction. So understanding that and using that common language for me is a really important thing for us to do to overcome one of the key challenges I see within the industry, which is what is the definition? What is that common language where we can speak with colleagues and peers in other industries and we all be very clear what we're actually talking about? Before we move on, I'd like to now ask you all to pick up your phones, which is a strange thing to do in a conference, and go to www.menti.com, M-E-N-T-I, menti.com. We're going to be using this throughout the morning to allow you as our audience to participate in the session. And once you've typed in and gone on your mobile phones to menti.com, very quickly just type in that code that you see there. So that's 37 40 76 5, and then press the submit button. That will take you through. Then just very quickly, which statement best reflects your knowledge of offsite? No right or wrong answers here, just giving ourselves and the panelists today a good idea of who's in the room, well, the virtual room, and getting an idea of understanding where we're all sitting. So select the statement which best reflects yourself, and then press submit. I see we have a lot of honest people in the room, which is great. Just getting to grips with the whole subject, which is good. So you should be able to see the answers coming through there. 56 or more of you have voted already. Some of you got no knowledge. That's fine. That's why we're here today. And indeed, the training that we were actually looking to develop was really for people who got very limited knowledge around offsite. So we can give to those 6 key professions, give them what do I need to do differently. So if you're just getting to grips with it, or if you've got no knowledge, I think you'll find the training materials that we're launching today are absolutely perfect for yourselves. Moving on to the next slide, got another quick question for you as well, which hopefully will help. So looking at the screen in front of you, never quite sure how quickly everybody's internet updates, but describe the current adoption of offsite across the UK construction sector in one word. So just type in one word into your menti.com. You should now see it's been refreshed. Just wait for my colleague to refresh that for us. And then we can type in one word which best reflects that. So one word which, in your opinion, best describes the current adoption of offsite across the UK construction sector. Slow, fractured. Wouldn't disagree with those. Fragmented, poor, patchy. Again, no right or wrong answer. Again, just giving us embryonic. Well done for somebody spelling that correctly. Better schooling than I had, which is good. Encouraging. Yeah, I would go with encouraging. We're seeing over the last 2 years a real movement in what I think is the right direction for us to actually harness all the benefits that we hopefully will be able to get from a result of adopting offsite. Mixed, hesitant, fragmented, yeah. It'll be interesting when we get onto the panel discussion, just to see how in the education sector, the housing sector, the infrastructure sector, if there's any difference in that adoption and that rate of uptake of offsite. Okay, that's given us a little bit of food for thought as panelists, and probably also to Mark, who's our keynote speaker for this morning. So, Mark, without further ado, I'll pass over to Mark Farmer, who's our keynote speaker for this morning, with those thoughts ringing your ears, Mark.
Thank you, Ian, and good morning, everyone. It's absolute delight to be able to support Supply Chain School this morning on the launch of this really important initiative, and I'm going to hopefully explain why I think this is an important initiative in terms of the timing of it and what's going on in terms of the bigger picture industry drivers that make this move to offsite even more relevant. So I'm just going to hopefully share my screen. Hopefully you can see that.
Yep, I can see that, Mark.
Okay. Right. So as I've just said, I'm just going to sort of set the scene for the two panel sessions that are happening during the course of this morning, both in terms of where offsite is happening and also this key issue around the skills gap that we need to plug in relation to understanding how we do offsite, if you like. And I always start at the beginning in this, and I make no apologies for harking back to the report I wrote in 2016, because actually, the 10 symptoms of failure that I talk about in that report are even though they've been covered many times before, are stark reminders as to why our industry has to change. Those symptoms of failure are not accidental. They're the result of deep-seated responses to the conditions in which the industry operates and the environment, particularly the economic environment that the industry operates in. But for me, what underpins all of those 10 particular issues, which I'm not going to go through now, is effectively a growing awareness that the industry has declining structural resiliency. So what do I mean by that? So the term resiliency is about the ability to bounce back. And what's clear is that our industry has shaped itself and structured itself to actually be pretty resilient and to respond, as I say, to very onerous conditions in which it trades and operates, which effectively are all about a sort of boom and bust cycle of discretionary spend from both the private and the public sector that means that we have this highly cyclical economic trend. And the best way to show this resiliency decline is graphically. And what this graph here is showing is the 40-year long run illustration of total construction employment. And as you can see, we employ a lot of people in our industry, over 2.5 million people. It's one of the biggest employers by sector. And what you see here is, of course, the sort of growth and decline in line with economic cycles over the last 40 years. So boom periods, recessionary periods. But what's really telling here is that actually in the last economic cycle, so between the global financial crisis in 2008, 2009, and sort of peak pre-COVID 2019, we actually did not manage to get to our previous peak employment position. And actually before that, we've had declining increases in that total peak employment, as you can see to the left there. But the last cycle was actually a net deficit in terms of our peak employment. And that again is shown here in relation to, if you look at employment as a percentage, and we hover around 7 to 8% ordinarily in terms of where construction employment sits. I see what I call an asymmetric construction labour cycle happening, which is it's getting shallower and shallower in terms of recovery phase for our industry to grow resources, and it's getting faster and faster to decline and to shed resources. So it's really easy for businesses to contract in a downturn, but it's getting increasingly more difficult for our industry to inflate and to grow in line with economic needs. And every time we have a growth period, it's getting more and more challenging. And that was shown most starkly in relation to post-global financial crisis. But clearly what lies ahead is probably the biggest concern as to where we are now in the COVID environment. And that all of that is relevant because we have this high labour intensity in construction. Everything we do is about just throwing labour at it, whether it's actually in professional services and even more so in terms of construction activities on site, where we rely on labour intensity to overcome what are structural issues around our productivity and efficiency. And everything I've just set out in terms of that structural decline in our labour force, which is being fed through both demographics, in terms of the leakage of people from retirement, but also a really big struggle and a growing struggle to attract new talent into our industry, has now been further amplified by the risks around Brexit. Whether it's a deal or no deal, we already know that we have challenges ahead in terms of recruiting from the EU, which has played a significant part in our construction workforce, certainly in London and the South East, but actually in the wider economy as well. And that's going to only amplify, as I say, the issues we have in front of us. And as I say, the reason I'm painting this picture is this wouldn't be so important to us as an industry if it wasn't for the flat line in productivity that we have. And even though productivity does fluctuate, and everyone talks about it being sort of a complete flat line, it's actually a regression flat line. We do see peaks and troughs in productivity. Funnily enough, we see increases in productivity and declines because we shed labour, and we tend to keep high quality labour that is more productive, which is quite interesting. But the bottom line is we have a long-term flat line productivity position. And all of these symptoms of failure that I spoke about at the beginning are showing themselves now in ways that perhaps we haven't seen before. So the fact that these headlines here all relate to the post-global financial crisis period, we're actually in an inflationary boom period, should be really disturbing to the industry. These are headlines of financial failures and distress in a growth period. So the inability of contractors to make money in a growth period should ring alarm bells in our industry in terms of the model not working. We obviously had Carillion, which many thought was a high watermark in terms of the bad news that our industry was going to present, but unfortunately that hasn't shown itself to be the case. We've had a continued litany of poor financial results, declining investor and lending sentiment, and that's even before you get to the world of COVID, which is what we're now in, and obviously is going to further amplify that fragility that we have in our construction model. That should all point to a basic failure in the construction industry's delivery model and start to get people thinking about, do we have to change? And then we also have this growing sense that, particularly in home building, where I spend most of my time, that actually the things we're delivering aren't right. They're fundamentally not right in terms of the ability to deliver quality, the ability to deliver assured outcomes. And if you look at some of the headlines, as I say, particularly in home building, but not exclusively, this is an issue in wider construction delivery as well. These are all real signals that something is going seriously wrong in relation to our ability to use that model that's not actually making much money for the supply chain, but also in doing that, not only is it not making any money, it's not delivering what customers are expecting. So a double whammy there in terms of the issues that our industry is facing. And as I say, an unprecedented combination of symptoms, if you like. And all of this is creating a really dangerous cocktail for our industry. So we have price volatility. So notwithstanding the fact that we have downward tendering at the moment, I'll come on to that in a second, there are actually upward input pressures on the supply chain for all sorts of reasons. We have this whole sense that you can't predict an outcome. So it is a bit of a gamble in terms of the cost, time, and quality outcomes you're going to achieve. We have risk of financial failure and insolvency. And we have this adversarial relationships being perpetuated in our industry around contractual interfaces being king. And on top of all of that, if it wasn't to be made worse, COVID in the last few months has reinforced this fragility in our model. This site labour intensity has shown itself to be a real weak point. So back in March, April time when COVID hit, we went from a complete site shutdown for a short period of time to back to work, realising that back to work wasn't safe from a public health perspective, lots of negative press and media headlines in relation to that, and then to a new normal of working in a socially distant, structured manner that enabled the industry to get on with stuff, but at a markedly different output. Interestingly, though, that reduction in site labour intensity has actually resulted in some trades being able to be more productive, which is part of this sort of opening up of this issue around the intensity of effort on site doesn't always lead to efficient working. So people crawling on top of each other, damaging each other's work, etc., is not conducive to effective working or efficiency. We clearly have set our parameters around how we're going to work in a post-COVID environment, but as I say, output is down when you can't have the same number of workers on site. And what that's done, certainly in my experience at CAST and talking to industry colleagues, it's led to a really interesting and amplified debate about the importance of modern methods of construction in our industry's delivery. So, all the different ways in which you can take labour off site, and that effectively is the imperative here in a post-COVID world. It was already the imperative for reasons I've set out, but in a post-COVID world, the risks around a further lockdown or further restrictions now mean that actually the supply chain or clients, depending on where the contractual risk sits, are going to face pain through the inability to continue working on site at a certain level of output. So we're seeing clients, design teams, contractors, specialists all unilaterally deciding to think about offsite in perhaps a different way than they may have done pre-COVID. And that's reflecting itself in a whole series of different approaches across the categories that Ian talked about at the beginning of this presentation, which again I'll come on to in a second. And against all of that, we also had this long-term backdrop of government recognition of the importance of the construction industry as part of economic growth and national industrial strategy. So this is something that's been running since 2016, 2017, whole litany of different reports which are building the case for government to try and pump prime and to influence the way in which we build in a better way. Some of that is bigger picture societal change, whether it's carbon or the like. Some of it is this government waking up to the importance of having a fit for purpose and modern construction industry as part of its economic growth ambitions. And in again, the world that I work in, housing, we're seeing definitely an acceleration of recognition of the role of modern methods of construction in the home building agenda, alongside what was already a presumption in favour of MMC for government direct spend programmes, whether it be prisons, hospitals, schools. We're now seeing any element of government funding, whether it's direct commissioning or whether it's funding through Homes England or land disposal, as being linked increasingly to the drive to modernise our delivery approaches, of which MMC and Offsite is a critical element. And we also had this unique position in my experience of 30 years in the industry. I've never seen this culmination of politicians asking for quantity, but also quality. So we're now having societal change driving our politicians to force, or forcing our politicians to force us to do things differently. So there's a regulatory environment here, whether it's a building safety agenda, whether it's carbon, as I've just said, whether it's competency, whether it's consumer protection, or whether it's latterly the planning process, which is all pointing towards us doing things differently, which can only help accelerate some of the changes I've spoke about. This fairly busy slide here is from a recent McKinsey report, The Next Normal, which I think is a really good summary of what I think is the macro picture for our industry. Along the top there, you see this sort of development process from buying land through design into the construction value add process. And what you see at the bottom of the histogram representation of where value is going to shift in the future. And what McKinsey is saying is that there is a wholesale shift towards offsite construction, which is that 20 to 30% purple bar you see towards the right there, which is 20 to 30% of stuff that's done elsewhere in that value chain moving to a factory, which is quite stark. On top of that, and to the far right, you see McKinsey saying 15 to 20% of value is up for grabs. And what they mean by that is that all of the fragmentation in our supply chain, all of the on-costing and layering and middlemen and non-value add that happens in our industry is going to get attacked. And if you don't add value in our industry, you're going to get found out. And actually that value is going to get taken by someone else, whether it's actually a client getting a cheaper job or whether it's the new innovators and disruptors making more money. And it will probably be both. But that's a really interesting sort of backdrop as to why this whole launch today is so important. And before I get into, the building on that thing about the relevance for today's launch and what Offsite for Everyone really means, I just want to have a reality check on this move to Offsite and MMC. It is clear to me that even though, notwithstanding everything I've just said, the push towards Offsite is not without its complications and it's not without its barriers. And I've identified 10 pretty fundamental market barriers to wide-scale adoption of a move to digital manufacturing thinking. And I'm not going to go through all of those points there. Some of these are directly faced into by the supply chain schools learning materials, which is fantastic. But this is really just to set the scene that we have some big issues in front of us, and we're really going to push MMC at an industry-wide scale to drive a tipping point. So just moving on to today, and the panel sessions you're going to hear from, and why learning, knowledge, and fresh perspectives from industry practitioners is so important. I'm going to just sort of be a bit controversial and make reference to some remarks that Hackett has made in relation to precedents for our industry changing in the past. And she's made multiple references to health and safety and what happened 20 odd years ago, 30 years even, when we moved towards CDM and a greater awareness of health and safety. Her background at the HSE led that to be something that she was very familiar with. And she quotes that as being a sort of a precedent for our industry shifting its culture. Now, my take on that, and I don't disagree with any of that, is that a lot of that health and safety move is actually common sense. It's not about technical competence. They're two different things. And unfortunately, we need not just that cultural change, we need increased technical standards, competence, and assurance, which is a lot more challenging than basic health and safety understanding. And what that unfortunately is going to mean is that competency filter is going to filter our available workforce even more than I've already set out as being a declining structural position. So that should be a concern for everyone. On top of, unfortunately, a sort of fairly negative picture, we're going to move into an environment where basic competence is going to be more important. And it's not just about health and safety awareness. This is about how do you physically do things? How do you technically do things that you have to be taught in a very specific way, over and above what you might have been taught as part of your core qualifications, whether it's vocational, technical, or professional. And this really means we have to have a new built environment workforce. For me, it comes down to having to attract and to actually retrain or upskill a new cohort of workers in our industry. This is why the Offsite schools or supply chain schools Offsite for Everyone initiative is really important. We need to have that material to enable people in industry in a sort of fairly informal way to upskill themselves across all of the functions you see there. And Ian's talked specifically about 6 key roles, which I think is absolutely right. And I've just expanded that into the roles you see there. But in essence, the 6 key generic roles are massively important here. And again, Ian pointed to this reference, which I was involved in formulating for Ministry of Housing last year, to an important start point for getting our terminology right. We have to be able to tell people what we mean by modern methods of construction. And it is actually modern off-site construction. We have to be talking about off-site. We have to be talking about process improvement, digital construction tools, combination of all of those categories in a way that also brings in the concept of pre-manufactured value. So PMV is a term I use a lot. For me, it's a proxy for productivity, predictability at a top line level. It's the ratio of a job that's manufactured as opposed to site built. So you're taking a total job and you're netting off preliminaries and site labor. So you're left with a manufactured residual, which obviously as you go up the pre-manufacturing scale, increases as a percentage. So an ordinary job will be about 40% PMV, full volumetric Cat 1 could be 80% PMV. And it's that journey from 40 to 80% our industry has got to get more familiar with. It has to understand the options, has to understand it's not just about modular as well. It's not just Cat 1. There's combinations of different approaches which enable you to increase your PMV. And I think part of this whole journey of upskilling and changing perceptions is a basic understanding of how we change behavior and deeply ingrained approaches. So this the interesting take from the design professions around how some elements of the design profession see offsite as a threat. They see it as a threat to their creativity. They see it as a threat to their scope. Reality, my view is that's not the case. This is about releasing designers to be more creative, but allowing manufacturing and digital principles to take away some of the grunt work that they do, which is non-value add. And the move towards different techniques, and I've shown there the Prism tool that my business has been involved with, which is an early stage design configurator. It's fairly rudimentary, but it's an interesting take on changing thinking towards early stage design for manufacture and assembly integration. And we also need to fundamentally shift the approaches to procurement. I know we'll talk about this on the panel sessions. We have to start thinking about not perpetuating failure. I already see in my business in tender returns in the last 6 months, a return to buying work. After all the things we've said over the last few years, we said we wouldn't go back to those behaviours, and we are. The rush to secure revenue from a consultancy and a contracting perspective, this is across the board, is going to be the death knell for our industry if we're not careful. We need to think about procurement more intelligently. We need to think about value-based balanced scorecard procurement. We need to think about using the tools such as the value-based tool that Construction Innovation Hub is advocating. We need to get this led by clients advisors, led by lawyers, all the people that make these critical decisions around how we procure, because Offsite and MMC only works if you think differently about procurement. And then we need to think about the value of what the Offsite for Everyone program is doing. And what it's effectively doing is it's creating an informal learning infrastructure for industry. It's by practitioners for practitioners, and overcoming some of the deep structural issues we have in actually getting formal qualifications embedded into our industry. And whether it's the new construction assembly apprenticeship standard, the level 2 standard you see on the right there, which took about 2.5 years to get to fruition, it's unbelievable, or whether it's Berkeley having to make up a bespoke training program for its digital apprentices because nothing existed. What actually this initiative is going to do is enable people on an informal basis to upskill using the materials that Supply Chain School is offering. And I think just sort of bringing this to a conclusion and why this is all really important, I keep coming back to this. I just don't get why construction, and particularly home building, which is a consumer-facing industry, in the truest sense of the word, hasn't got the equivalent of what we see in other industries, whether it's Johnny Ive at Apple or Terence Conran or James Dyson. We don't seem to have a sense of using our brand to drive value. And it's been shown, and you can see on the right there, that if brand strength can lead to economic benefits and financial performance. Our industry seems to be more about just buying land cheap and building cheap and then selling high. And that's not the way that we're going to secure a fit for purpose business, certainly in a world where consumerism is all around us and the media have got their hooks into our industry, particularly home building again. And it's going to be a risk to anyone involved, whether you're a consultant, a contractor, a supplier, a specialist. If you can't deliver what you say you're going to deliver, then somewhere in the media or including social media, you're going to get called out. So I think this is really important in terms of exposing failure in our industry in a way that we haven't seen before. TripAdvisor culture coming to construction is something I talk a lot about. The HBF 5-star rating system, is it trusted? ? We have a whole load of things coming forward that are going to put us front and center. Wherever we sit, there'd be no hiding place. So that should be driving our desire to think differently about how we deliver and really absorbing new ways of delivery. So to close, and I've tried to be a balance there in terms of, setting the reality of the challenges we have, but also setting out the great opportunity we have to do things differently. And the timing of this initiative is critical. The stakes have never been higher, and I'm very clear in that. Even in the 4 or 5 years since Modernise or Die, things have only got more starker. We have a choice to make. All businesses and organisations, everyone listening on this call has a choice to make about whether you want to future-proof your capability, your knowledge, your approach, or you want to take the chance of business as usual. And unfortunately, business as usual, I think, is only going to mean one thing. So that's the choice we have. That's why today's so important. Again, as I say, really delighted to be able to support today's launch and look forward to participating in the first panel. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you very much, Mark. That's absolutely great. Folks, if we were in the room, we'd all be clapping. So let's use the reactions button on the bottom of our screens and use that and put our hands together and say thank you very much to Mark. That's a really great keynote. Really appreciate that. Okay, we're moving on now. We've got 40 minutes set aside actually for a roundtable discussion. Good to see the thumbs up are going there and the claps are going online, which is great. Where we're going to be joined by Emily King, who's a client solutions director, should I say, of Mid Group. I'm going to give us a perspective on the housing market and the education market. Then we've got Alex Gosney, who's the head of procurement infrastructure at Lang O'Rourke. And we've got Oliver, who's the technical innovation director at Barrett's Development. So if I can just hand over to Emily just to say hello. There's no presentations, but Emily just say hello. Then we'll move on to Alex and on to Oliver.
Thanks, Ian. Morning. As Ian said, I'm Emily King from Mid Group. We are a relatively new contractor on the market, 6 years old, And we were started by, it's fair to say, a group of people that were a little frustrated for all the reason Mark's just touched on, in an industry at every stage that was inefficient, right back from design. Because if you are not thinking in a different way from construction, you're definitely not thinking in a different way when you're asking the question. So we are what has probably become an off-site contractor, but really we focus on manufacturing-led construction, but we are what we like to say solution agnostic. We don't own a factory. It's about finding the right off-site solution for each and every problem.
Thanks, Emily. That's great. So be grabbing for that 15 or 20% that Mark highlighted.
We're getting there.
Yeah, excellent stuff. Yeah. Alex, over to you.
Morning, everyone. So I'm Alex Gosney from Lang O'Rourke, and I suppose similar to Emily, we're from a business which is passionate around doing things differently. We've invested heavily in our design for manufacture for assembly facilities, and we've got the biggest concrete facility in Europe based in Worksop, which is our centre of excellence for modern construction. I've been in the industry for 15 years, and I think it's probably tantamount to what Mark was saying, is that probably the ways we were constructing 15 years ago hasn't changed significantly over that period. We've seen small change, but I think it's now time to take that opportunity and really move things forward. So looking forward to the panel session today.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Alex. And Oliver, over to you.
Morning, everyone. So I'm Oliver Novakovic. So I'm Technical and Innovation Director at Barratt. Had about 25 years experience of delivering offsite on the ground through numerous developers and within the BRE. Worked most industries, housing, health, education. So from volumetric all the way to panelised timber, concrete, steel. Spent the last 6 years at Barratt moving the business towards delivering 20% using offsite construction. We have now a new target of 25%. So done a lot of on-the-ground delivery of getting actual systems out, probably tens of thousands of systems that have built homes. So hopefully I can bring a view to the panel.
Thanks, Oliver. That's great. And Mark, just before we jump into the questions, great presentation. Are you happy for that presentation to be shared, Mark?
Yep, indeed. Yep.
Lovely. So we'll make that available to everybody, and you'll be able to access that through the supply chain school. Details will come through to you before the end of the call. That's lovely. Okay. Actually, the first question we've got for you, so just advancing the screen, you'll see we're back to Menti. So some of you have joined us a little bit later. You need to type menti.com into your mobile or into a separate browser window. But if you type menti.com into your mobile, you'll then be asked to put a code in, the code that you see at the top of the screen, 3740765. Mark talked about the requirement for client leadership. So here's a very quick question for you. If we're looking forward 2 years, difficult thing to do given the current climate that we've got, looking forward to 2 years, how do you see your clients' demand for offsite changing? And I'm going to come to the panel to comment on this in a moment's time, but whilst you're putting in you're having a think about it and putting in there, it's good to see there's nobody in the reduced column, so we've obviously got the right people in the room, or we're just preaching to the converted, I'm not sure. Interesting. So whilst the votes are coming in, Emily, I'm going to start with yourself, actually. I know that mid-group you work in the education sector and the housing sector as well. How are you seeing clients' demands changing?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's important to understand about the question is, for me, it comes back to upskilling the market. They are never, I don't think anyone will ever say, I would like an off-site building. I don't think that's the right question. I think we have to provide it as the core solution. So I think clients are becoming less afraid of off-site. I think we compete against any tier 1 contractor, and we are never discarded because of our approach. So I absolutely think the demand will increase purely because the quality of the off-site offer will increase. And so when people see the reduction in programs, the increase in quality, all of the positives that we all know about, it will become the norm. So absolutely, yes, it will increase. My thought is by more than 20%, to be honest.
Excellent. So Emily, do you see any difference between the education market and the housing market? Obviously, education, centralised procurement, and then the housing market, you're in a consumer market.
Absolutely. So I think in education, the work that I've done with the DFE, also located their development partner, Construction Innovation Hub, the Department for Education is definitely leading in recognising the benefits of offsite. Now, the early drivers for that were around putting in schools on live sites. So you want to decrease the program, you want to decrease the disruption, and yet it still has to hit the budget, it still has to hit the quality. So to be honest, that was the reason MMC was first looked at. Can we get these more complex sites done in the same time so that schools can still be open in September? So the DFE, the Education Department, is definitely ahead with regards to that. The other advantage they have is a standard specification across the country. So as an offsite supplier, you can understand that specification and ensure that your solution that you're manufacturing meets that specification. What we've seen in the residential market is it doesn't yet have that joined up thinking. It doesn't have national standards that a manufacturer can work to. So manufacturers or our supply chain are constantly having to understand each and every procurement route. So every local authority you work with will be slightly different. So it is behind, but I don't think that the clients themselves are adverse to offsite.
Thanks, Emily. That's really insightful. Alex, just moving to slightly different sectors. I know Laing O'Rourke, very much an infrastructure-led business and major commercial projects as well. How do you see your clients changing over the next 2 years?
I think we're already seeing a marked shift at the moment here. I think the pandemic could potentially offer us an opportunity in this space. I think if we look at our own factory environments, we've definitely found it easier to implement social distancing in the factory, and clients can now potentially see that as a way of de-risking projects. I think if you look public spending, there's a huge volume of projects that are coming to market in the next 5 years, and I think a way of, I suppose, de-risking the programs associated with them is doing things differently in an offsite manner. As a business, we have 2 affiliate businesses, one for Structures Expanded and one for MEP Crown House. And we're also seeing a lot more inquiries coming in from some of our peers in the tier 1 contracting community into our affiliate businesses. So I think we're seeing clients wanting to de-risk major schemes, and I think we're also seeing contractors wanting to de-risk their programs and portfolios who are working for other clients.
Excellent. Mark, do you want to comment on as well? I know you've done a lot of work in the housing sector, but much wider than that. You've got a wider role, haven't you?
Yeah, but I'll just pick up on the point Emily made, though, about how housing is different to some of the wider sectors that MMC is being pushed in, and it is relevant, and it's something I've referenced recently in a report that I co-authored about 3 weeks ago. We do have this hugely fragmented housing delivery model where, you know, the commissioners of residential development span house builders, niche developers, investors, local authorities, housing associations, you name it. So the ability to standardize, and there's clearly this big challenge about how we drive MMC through standardization, is much more challenging in the residential environment than it is in the public works arena, for instance. So as was said, DFE, I think, of basically leading the way here through not just MMC 1 and 2 frameworks, but the sort of next generation evolution, which is going to start using sort of kit of parts thinking. That's obviously easy to do when you have one client. When the DFE is saying, this is how we want you to design our schools, and you can use this kit of parts, you can do that. But when you have thousands of different commissioners all doing their different things, that's tricky. And I think it's going to be a really interesting challenge over the next few years to see whether the resi market starts to aggregate and starts to actually align on some standards. And it won't necessarily be the same as the platform design for manufacturing assembly approach that government are using for its own works programs. I think there's a variant on that for housing and for apartments, which is more about understanding the sort of generic commonalities, but also respecting individuals to come up with different solutions in slightly different ways. We do, you know, the key to it though is we do need to drive scale. We need to aggregate on the demand and the supply side. We need collaboration from clients. We need collaboration from manufacturers to prevent the sort of cottage industry fragmentation we see. But I'm hopeful that we can get there. I think with some strategic interventions from the likes of Homes England and the government conditioning certain things, there's some interesting stuff we can do.
Thanks, Mark. Just speaking about that collaboration point, Alex, you talked about working more with your peers. So you're obviously collaborating a lot more with your competitors in some places as well.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to some things we were talking about at the start. This is an opportunity to change our industry, not just individual businesses. So I think we have got to change the way and the mindset of how we do work together, because I think we all see, or a lot of us see, the opportunity by doing things differently. So whether that's working with your peers in a contracted environment, or whether it's working with the ultimate client in a public or private sector environment, I think people are seeing past some of the traditional mindsets that we've seen, and it gives people an opportunity to learn from other businesses as well, from working with other contractors, because there's some fantastic work being done out there within our industry. We often focus on the bad stuff, but there is some absolutely brilliant stuff going on in the industry from Offsite and MMC across the patch, and I think it's trying to celebrate some of that success to build some momentum across the industry, not just in little pockets.
Thanks, Alex. I'm going to hold that collaboration thought for a moment and come back to Emily in a few minutes' time about that. But I've got another question for you all on the Mentimeter now, which I'll put on the screen in front of you. So back to the audience, and this is going to take you a little bit longer to do, folks. It's so probably a couple of minutes, and no right or wrong answers here, but I'd just like you to think about ranking from your perspective. What's driving Offsite? Is it speed? Is it cost? Is it quality? Is it environment? So when you go onto menti.com and you've got your code in there, it should be working fine for you. You'll get the chance to rank one and then submit it. So and then go on to the next one, and you'll be given those 8 different drivers. Somebody's got it already, as you can see there, and then you can rank up to 8 different ones as you go through it. Why is you doing that? Because it'll take a little bit of time. I want to come over to Oliver, actually, because Oliver, your clients are very different. You're building for a consumer market. In effect, from an Offsite solutions point of view, you are the customer in many ways, aren't you? But so just wanted to expand on that a little bit. What's driving Barrett in this agenda?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting to hear what Emily was saying, and definitely agreed. I mean, I've got 380 different local authorities that have different views on what design needs to look like, and I've got to try and meet those. And don't forget, I'm in Scotland, Wales and England, so that adds an additional layer. And then if I take London, Bristol and Manchester, we've all got their own drivers, and I think that's only going to increase with the whole drive around carbon, the correct drive around low carbon. So, but I have to say, I think what we've been able to do, we produce a lot of homes all over the country. I don't think Offsite stops flexibility. I think that's a bit of a myth. We're doing it, and we're doing Offsite in over 100 sites now all over the country. I think what you have to do is understand that Offsite just gives you some constraints, and it, as does traditional, as does any system, and you've just got to work those out. And like any good engineer and architect, you basically design around the constraints to deliver an outcome. I mean, we're a B2C, so we're direct to customers, so very different from probably the people on the panel. We've got to, our customers, and customers want to see some sort of difference and change. But other industries, automotive, have really tackled that quite well in the way they've sort of allowed customers to think they're getting sort of mass customization, but actually there's a lot of standardization in there, and that's probably the journey we're taking. I mean, collaboration wise, I think definitely in the last 25 years, what I've seen is much more collaboration by the big house builders with medium and small house builders. So, projects like AIM-CH, which are worth a view, where industries getting together. I mean, we personally have all of the big house builders coming to our Offsite sites, and we talk to them about our experiences, because like Mark said, we need mass. We need them all to be on board so that these manufacturers can, if you talk to all the manufacturers, the first question they ask is, can you guarantee volume for the next X amount of years? And it's a circular process, because we guarantee volume if some of the things you've ranked here on Offsite are met: speed, cost, quality. It's just you've got to take that into account. So I think for me, Offsite is on the brink of being applied in volume, and in fairness, like I said, we're on 100 sites, and if you look at most of the developers, they're applying one type of Offsite or other. Probably the bigger question is what level of Offsite, and whether it's panelized or volumetric. I think that sometimes that is affected by the constraints of the different systems, especially in residential, probably not so much in other sectors. So sadly, there isn't the silver bullet, the classic, not one shoe fits all. And I think that's, the good clients set clear criteria to allow the offsite companies to come along. So if you look at one of our sets of house types, the Barratt side, not David Wilson, but Barratt's been designed specifically with offsite in mind to allow easy access. So you've got to take that positive move.
Thanks, Oliver. Just picking up on that point about collaboration, and I'll be coming up to Emily in a moment. Oliver, you've got to obviously clearly got to collaborate with your product manufacturers. How do you foster that collaboration? Because it's a values thing, isn't it? It's how do you do that?
There's a couple of things. So we do a lot of sandpits where I think what's important in collaboration is that, one, we understand who our stakeholders are and what their drivers are, because they're critical to success. So if I need to know what a timber frame, a volumetric manufacturer's drivers are, what their constraints are, and it's important for them to understand what's driving us and what affects us. Probably in the last 6 years at Barratt, that's probably the biggest thing that we've done, is we've allowed our supply chain to really understand our business and how it works. Because frankly speaking, not many people actually know how development works. When you talk to manufacturers and consultants, they don't really know, because a lot of them haven't worked as house builders. So they don't really understand. And that's probably been our biggest journey, is to explain to them what's driving us. So a classic example would be, you get a volumetric manufacturer, or any manufacturer, I should say, comes and says, I can build a house in a day. You say, that's great. I don't sell houses that quickly. Because I don't have customers buying every day. I sell one house a week. So it's a bit useless to me to have that possibly. And obviously, I have sites that sell quicker and slower. So just that simple explanation, they sort of sit there and go, oh, right. So it's not that we can't still take the benefit of speed, but we have to take it in context of development, not in context of how quickly you can go. So I think that's been hopefully the big journey that Barratt have taken with their supply chain and new supply chain, is being really honest about, well, actually, that's really great, but it doesn't help us, or it doesn't fit with our model. Now, it might fit in education and health. It might, supermarkets. I did a lot of work with supermarkets. The quicker you build, the quicker they start selling out of their store. So they're over the moon. That there's a different argument in that session. So I think that's, true open book discussions with your supply chain, understanding them understanding you. And then most importantly, we do a lot of trials. We allow people to come and actually do the trials. And then probably the last thing is all stakeholders, mortgage lenders, building insurance companies, NHBC, LABC. We have a lot of stakeholders that are gateholders for house building. And they need to be in that journey, and we bring them in and make sure that they understand that journey. So I think that's probably how collaboration really works, is being just very open.
Yeah, excellent. I think, Oliver, that's really great. Emily, can I come over to you, because you've got, as the mid-group, as I understand it, a kit of part approach where you're working with selected suppliers, building very close relationships with them. How do you foster that collaboration as, in effect, 5 years in business, you're a startup, in effect, aren't you? So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, it harks back to what Mark's pointing out about the residential. Our kit of parts, we are very confident on with regards to education, commercial buildings, because what we have there is an iterative improvement process. So we have continuous improvement. Every time we build a school, the cost goes down, the speed goes up, and the quality increases. And that's shown through our EPC scores on our schools. Our standard schools are carbon neutral in operation, and that is purely from a continuous improvement approach to building, using all of the quality in there. Now, the way we've achieved that is absolutely not in isolation. One thing that is really important to recognize is mid-group is about 70 people right now. Our knowledge is not within those 70 people, it's within our supply chain. And the process of improving these schools is absolutely all of us together. Now, if you talk to our key supply chain on that process, taking schools as an example, they have told us that they sell to us cheaper now than they sell to another contractor. And the reason is they know that we understand offsite. They know that we educate our clients. So you're not going to get to a point and they're going to redesign and do all of the complicated things. They know that our programmers understand offsite. Our QSs understand offsite. We don't have any estimators. We started our own BIM company because that is at the heart of what we do. We don't add it on. And so, all of these things, they trust us. They trust what we are saying. And so they don't add that risk factor onto their products, or they do, but it's hugely reduced. And that absolutely is a two-way stream. They invest in us because we invest in them. Now, we are trying to get there on residential, but because of all of the kind of items that we've mentioned before, it is more difficult. The standards are just more difficult to achieve time after time after time and improve on, because everybody wants something slightly different. Even if you're just, we do every type of resi, but if you just look at social housing, it's a different requirement everywhere you go. It's a different price point everywhere you go. If we work for Essex County Council and we deliver a school, even if it's not through the DFE, they use the DFE standards as their standard. Now that standard specification is just something that we don't have. So whilst we still form those relationships in resi, and it's really, really important, you don't see the same quantity of continuous improvement.
Interesting, very interesting. Mark, do you want to come in on that? And also the concept of kind of mass customization that Oliver talked about as well?
Yes, so I think the resi is pretty scary when you strip it back and look at the variations on a theme that we're all designing to. There's only so many ways you can design a bathroom or a kitchen or 1, 2 or 3 bed units. If you do the data analysis, it shows that we're scattergunning around what are very common themes. So it doesn't prevent the situation we have though, which is everyone's going off doing their own thing. And also we have to recognize the maturity of the offsite sector and the resi sector is probably more than we've got in other sectors. So we have some significant businesses, particularly in the Cat 1 modular space, that have invested tens of millions of pounds in coming up with systems that actually are pretty good and have been probably accredited and have gone through all the processes, but they're all different. And so we've got this challenge around, do we just say, let's all scrap all of that and just have a common standard and forget about all the investment? Or do we work with the industry to go on a journey towards more commonality and to understand how they can actually align on certain elements of what their systems do and how they perform, functional space requirements, etc. And I think, that move towards mass customization is a really interesting point. It's something that's easier achievable when you use multiple categories of MMC. So if you use category 2 panelized with category 5 sub-assemblies, you can do a lot more in terms of playing around with combinations. But I'm also, having seen a bit of the future, and there's one particular factory that hasn't launched yet, which is a category 1 modular factory, which will effectively be mass customizable, every module that rolls off the production line, because it's using advanced manufacturing and it's CAD-CAM. It's basically code being spat out to a roll forming machine. It doesn't matter what the dimensions are. The components are the same. They're just cut to different lengths, and you can customize every single module to suit, which is hugely interesting because you can maximize your pre-manufactured value. You're reducing the amount of site effort. You can create some really interesting architecture. So I think, the world of manufacturing is going to change. We'll probably move, my guess is we'll move away from big set piece factories to more distributed manufacturing. We'll see a lot more stuff happening closer to sites, even on-site, combinations of both. And that mass customization will be achieved through technology. It won't happen analog. The idea of, building in the sheds and doing that on a customized basis is tough to do at scale. You could do it on a very small SME level, and lots do very successfully actually. But on the bigger scale, to have mass customization, you need to use digital and advanced manufacturing. And I think, that's the exciting thing about where the industry's going. All of this stuff is being looked at as we speak.
Thanks, Mark. We'll just move on. We've got 10 minutes left now with the panel. And move on to the next question, where actually we'll invite questions from the audience, so you can actually type into menti.com if you've got any questions for the panel. But I would like to go to Alex whilst you're thinking about questions for the panel. And Alex, mass customization, how is that effective in the infrastructure industry, where you're looking at things which are they repeatable?
Yeah, and I think you pick your battles, I think, here, and I think there's elements that you can standardise. If you look at, I suppose, highways as an example, there's lots of elements in highways which you can standardise. And then to Mark's point earlier around the design community, the designers can really show the flair in other elements, whether that be flow of traffic, whether it be areas where there's a real value add. So I think we don't have to standardise everything, because that would take some of the opportunism away from it. But I think having a core foundation of standardised products which the suppliers can then mass produce, but then we can also then say, actually, there's X, Y, Z add-on that we can put onto that product that can give the flair to whatever project it be, whether it be highways, commercial, residential. So I think there is a blend there, Ian, that you've just got to pick the battles.
Thanks, Alex. I've got some questions coming up here. So one of the questions, what's the future for the design world? Oliver, do you want to go with that? Yeah, you were talking about the fact that you've got 300 odd local authorities who all want different look and feel. So what's the future for design, the designers?
Oh, wow. So I have to say, for house builders, it's looking difficult. And we need to really think about how we do it. I mean, it's critical we create great places, and there's lots of standards and approaches we take to do that. So, but I have to say, there's lots of regulations coming. So there's the whole, sort of Part M changes that are coming, the different categories. So that will change the shape of homes. So that will affect every home will could have a different shape. You've then got, the aesthetics that local authorities want to see. So I think we're going to have to think very carefully about how we introduce designs that allow us to meet the different requirements of local authorities. But I also think we need to, part of our role is to inform local authorities and government on some of the trials and tribulations of having so many variances, and the impact it has, not on just how easy it is to build, but probably more importantly on the problem with building something different all the time. It can enhance mistakes happening. You've just got to take a robust approach to that. So I think the design world is one that, whether it's because of zero carbon, biodiversity, the whole Part M and approach is just going to be an interesting one that, we're currently looking at, in a lot of detail on how to use, not standardized, but, maybe mass customized designs to meet all those needs.
Thanks, Oliver. I'm just coming to some of the questions which are coming up. There's one which is somebody saying, how do they get involved at that early stage, which is really something to do with procurement models. Emily, do you want to pick up on that? How do manufacturers and suppliers get involved at that really early stage, which is actually essential if we're going to be successful with Offsite?
I mean, I think a lot of what we do is about relationships, communication. We are called mid-group contracting and consulting, and I think there is a point that says, when we say consulting, we're not going to try and take over the consulting world, but ask us questions. We do a lot of, we might talk to someone for a year before they start procuring something, and we are just more than happy to have those conversations. And it's really, really important, because often those conversations will be, actually, it's not for us, but this is what you should do. Or, if you start looking at in this direction, these are the savings that you will get. This is the increase in quality that you will get. So there's a whole number. Any 1 week, 5 or 10 of the meetings I have, which are regular meetings, are projects that don't yet exist. And it is just about educating the client without being patronizing, but also giving them confidence. So taking them to different sites, explaining what we do. And so I would say the important thing is to get involved pre-procurement. And then the procurement has to be malleable, or, you have to, with procurement, I think the problem we face is that it's difficult to ask for what you want. Now, if you talk to a client, Oliver will have very, very specific needs. Those needs are not, I want it to be made out of brick and cement. So if you help a client talk about what they actually want from their project, what is client value, then you can start to formulate your procurement. Now, unfortunately, I think public sector procurement is not yet there. I think through the Construction Innovation Hub, the MTC, that there's groups of people that are looking at that, and I think it will change, but maybe not fast enough.
Okay, that's great. Alex, I'm going to come over to you because obviously procurement hat on. How do we engage those SME subcontractors? Questions coming up. How best for SME subcontractors to keep up with changing times? How do you do that? And how do you keep that flexibility and that outcome-based procurement, which Emily's just talked about?
Well, I think in terms of keeping up with the times, I think some of the tools the school's got available on the website, especially in the Offsite arena, is a fantastic place to start. It's a free tool. It can be used for anyone within your organisation, and I think we were discussing earlier, and I think that the uptake in training since the start of the pandemic from the school has been fantastic. So I think that is a really good place to start. In terms of business-to-business relationships, I think it's just that honest trust and transparency that Emily spoke about throughout, to be honest. I think if you can have a conversation early enough in the process to bring some innovation or an idea to a contractor or a client, I think people will listen. I think the challenge sometimes is where people maybe oversell what the solution is or what it can do. I think no one's going to push the door shut if there's a fantastic idea. I think the frustration comes, and this is from our own clients and ourselves, is where potentially there is an oversell without a delivery there. And I think the relationships we've got with our supply chain are fantastic, because the ones that are based on trust, and what Emily said there around it's give and take is absolutely that. We've got to invest the time to share our skills and knowledge, and likewise we want our supply chains to invest in their businesses to deliver some of these fantastic schemes that are available throughout the country. And I think hopefully some of the sound bites around Build Back Better, the government's been talking around, turns more from a sound bite into some fiscal stimulus for the industry, and that gives us all the opportunity to invest in our own businesses moving forward.
Thanks, Alex. That's really great. We've just got a couple of minutes left, so what I'm going to do is give the last question back to Mark to really summarise what we've got. But Mark, it's pretty bit of a cheeky question. This one has just come up and said, is the problem the QS?
The honest answer is yes, in many instances, not always. I don't want to overgeneralise, but I can say this because I am trained as a QS, albeit I don't do much QSing anymore. But I know from the origins of where the debate goes around commercials that one of the forks in the road is that early assessment by a QS whose budget might be under pressure, that thinks about offsite, probably starts with not understanding how you estimate the cost of it properly, how you evaluate the total financial impact, including the cost of money on time. So the speed profile of cash flow for both developer, but also for things like main contractor preliminaries and site supervisory elements. And again, that's why your initiative is so important, because it's actually been contributed to by QS practices, including my own business and the Linear and others that have actually understood this. And there is a progressive element of the QS profession that wants to make this work, wants to get that understanding, the commercial principles ingrained in their people. And if we can get more people thinking like that, then we can increase the uptake, because the worst thing in the world is to have an early conversation between a client, the QS and a project manager, and between them they contrive to turn a job that could have been very effectively delivered through MMC into a trad job, because it's what they know and it's what they did last time. And actually, probably in fairness, the fees may not be there for them to learn on the job, and blah blah blah, it goes round and round. So there's lots of reasons. I'm not pointing fingers, it's just the reality of where we are in our industry, and it goes to the heart of being bold and taking a leadership position that actually do you know what, we do need to change, and we're all going to be part of that, whatever our role is on the project team.
Excellent, Mark. That's really great. So a big thank you to our panel. Our time is up, but I've taken away from that some really key points around the need for collaboration, the need for flexibility, the need for different business models and procurement, which goes with that. But overridingly, the concept from manufacturing, the voice of the customer, understanding what your customer actually wants, and Emily articulated that really well in terms of what does Oliver require as a house builder, and I think that's really, really important for us to be able to listen to our customers and start those conversations is very, very important indeed. So let's put our hands together, our virtual hands, using those reaction buttons, and thank Mark, thank Alex, thank Oliver, and thank Emily. And there's been so many questions which have been coming up that I'll make a commitment from our side. We have got we do a number of what we call lunch and learn sessions, and what I'd like to do in the Offsite School going forward is to be running on a monthly basis or even more often these kind of Q&A panels over lunchtime, where we bring together panels of experts to answer some of the multitude of questions that I see coming out. So watch this space, and we'll make sure that we answer all of these questions during those offsite panels that we will do over the next in the lead up to Christmas. Yeah. So now we're moving on to closing the offsite skills gap. Set ourselves some time aside to do this. Really pleased to say we've got a really good panel again. Got Joe Dyden, who's a business manager at Build Offsite, trade body responsible for lobbying government, influencing change within the industry. Then John Hanscom, he's a partner at Akerlof. Some of you might know John from his days at Kia. He's now set out on his own with Jamie Hillier. Then we've got Charlotte Hale, who's the operations director at So Modular, based down in South Wales. Now under full lockdown, Charlotte, no doubt. So, but no doubt the factory's still running.
Yes, we are, yeah.
Coming to us all, I fear, soon. And over to our last speaker is Dominic Coyne, who's a director at Build Space. And so if I just get you all to say hello, starting with Joe first of all, and then move on to John.
Thanks, Ian. Morning, Joe Dye from Build Offsite. For those of you who don't know who Build Offsite are, we're a lobbying, research, networking group seeking to deliver positive permanent transformation of the UK construction sector, in particular in relation to pre-manufactured solutions and offsite.
Thank you, Joe. And moving on to John.
Morning all, I'm John Hanscom, partner at Akerlof. We're a consultancy that specialise in modern construction and offsite, but not on the necessarily on the materiality side, so whether it's precast or timber volumetric, but on helping clients link what they're trying to get out of construction and make sure that their values are linked to the outputs. So yeah, that's us.
That's that focus on outcomes we were talking about in the first panel. Yeah, absolutely. And Charlotte, over to yourself.
Hello, I'm Charlotte Hale, said Operations Director. We're a timber frame modular structures company based in South Wales. We concentrate on sustainability and innovation in the industry, and our aim is to sustainably redefine the construction industry with timber solutions.
Excellent. Looking forward to hearing your input later on. And finally, over to Dominic.
Yes, good morning all. My name's Dominic Coyne. I work as a director of Build Space. We are a bit out of the norm. We're a recruitment consultancy focusing on off-site construction builds. We've been working the market for about 10 years or so, and work on both production and delivery vacancies. It's been quite a change, and we're just trying to do our bit to sort of upskill the market, and our sort of time of the School of Sustainability has helped with that.
Thanks, Dominic. So as per session one, we've got a few questions for you to the audience out there. So if we move on to the next slide, please. Yeah, there we go. So if you want to go back to your phones, menti.com, and type in 37 40 76 5. If you're already in it, you shouldn't need to do that. But a little bit of thinking around them. Which job functions in construction most need to know about offsite? So you've got them to rank in order. So you'll get what should be the first out of those there's 6 different job functions we put there, but we put another category in case we're missing one of those. So we've got site managers, project managers, QSs, procurement, logistics, designers and architects. So if we're ranking them in order of the job functions which need to know about offsite, which would you put first? So so it'll take a little while for the various answers to come in, but I'd probably go to Dominic first of all, because I've asked Dominic to join the panel because quite often we forget in the industry about how importantly, where does our labour come from? Where do our professions come from? A lot of the industry relies upon labour agencies and the like. So, they need to be part of the solution. So, Dominic, from your own perspective, how do you work with people within the industry to upskill them at the moment?
Well, it's quite interesting you asked that. I mean, as I say, having been in the market for some time, the sort of the growth of modular build, which is by and large the bulk of our work, has been has been huge in the last 4 or 5 years, especially, and there has been a marked sort of skills gap there that we've been trying to broach. Where is, if we look at your little Menti chart there, where is the biggest push and pull from our clients? Most of it is in delivery, but there are obviously issues in production as well, which are starting to improve. I think where the problem we've had and the problem that we find with clients is there are 2 distinct teams and have been historically. So there's been a production team which has been factory based and a delivery team which has been in the field delivering the job. And it's not often that they communicate and understand how each other's works. And that sort of gap has been hard to bridge, but in recent times, there's been a real push to try and get the delivery guys going the other way and vice versa, so that sort of ironed out that crease as best we can.
Thanks, Dominic. So we're getting some interesting results coming in. John, just coming over to yourself, as somebody with a main contractor background, but now working on your own consultancy and obviously coming across lots of clients, where do you see the sticking points are? And refer back to the Menti slide if you wish, because it's interesting to see what the audience thinks there.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, I think it's across the board. And I think in terms of training, it's really important that each discipline or part of the chain understands the other. And so, architects understand logistics and cost consultants understand design and so on and so forth. I also think as much as you've got functional roles there, I think within the training material there's a lot around social value, collaboration and change management. And I think they're all really important modules to undertake because this change is broader than just descriptions, roles and different forms of construction.
So what you're alluding to there is there's a range of soft skills which are required as well as technical skills.
Yeah, one only works with the other.
Yeah, so that's the kind of the ability to drive change. It's the ability to understand customers and the like. Yeah.
Yeah, much so, and link all those with both methodology, but also reducing carbon and all the things that are important to our customers and ourselves as human beings, I suppose.
Yeah, excellent. Can I just ask, John, project managers coming forth on the list there. What do you think about that? Because obviously, if the client has a project manager and they're the first point of contact, could they scupper the deal straight away or scupper the opportunity for Offsite?
Listen, I think it's broader than that. I think it's easy to blame other disciplines for failure, and it's really important that all disciplines understand each other. So. I'm not sure that project managers are to blame as more than a designer or procurement or quantity surveying, really.
We're all in it together. Charlotte, quite different from a manufacturer's point of view, isn't it? Yeah. How do you see the skills need from a manufacturer's perspective?
I quite agree with the audience. I think design integration is key. What we're finding is design integration into the shop floor and planning functions is really key. And the majority of production workers have an inability to read construction drawings proficiently and don't have very good IT skills. So whereas the machinery that we install in today is very high tech into our MNC facilities, but the skilled workers do not have the skills in order to succeed in terms of IT, as I said. And in terms of the design to the planning function, there are not enough architects with knowledge in the MNC sector. We recently put an advert out for designers, and we found that there's a lot of designers with good construction knowledge, and then there's a lot of construction professionals with MMC knowledge, but we don't tend to find the two, and that's why we're developing our skills academy to concentrate on that area.
Interesting. Talk more about your skills academy, which you just mentioned briefly there, Charlotte. Interesting.
So our skills academy will be developed with Neath Talbot College and universities, and it's developed alongside, so we've got a production facility and we'll have classrooms based alongside this academy. So real life examples will be instilled into the academic learning. So a student will see a project from design inception to completion and post-manufacturing testing. And these real life examples will be involved in nearly every lecture, every class, so students can get full rounded knowledge and embed it into their learning.
Really important for the next generation of people to entering our industry to come out with those skills, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes.
Joe, can I just pick up on that? Because I know Build Offsite, you've been working with universities, schools of architecture, etc. What challenges do you see there about the next generation of people coming into our industry?
I think there's a particular challenge around, well, for want of a better phrase, the millennials and the next generation of talent coming through. I think it's, and to pick up on some points that you and John mentioned around the cultural mindset, this isn't traditional construction. The lines are continuing to be blurred between construction, manufacturing, engineering, these high value industries. The developed involvement of technology and the increased use of technology within the process will attract that generation. I think as a sector, we don't do a great job of marketing and promoting the benefits of offsite in terms of how it differs from traditional construction. You think about the use of social media accounts and the like now, which should be used to attract new talent. But I think there's, as the Menti graph shows, I mean, it is across the board where we need to upskill, we need to train new people, we need to attract new talent. And I think things like the Offsite for Everyone, where it's taking a much more robust, standardized approach to training than we've probably ever seen before, for a sector that prides itself on collaboration, repeatability, standardization. It's satisfying to see that beginning to move into the training domain now as well.
Thanks, Joe. John, just coming back to yourself, we've talked in terms of the next generation of people coming into the industry, that will help with the skills shortage, but we've also talked, and Mark Farmer talked about the skills shortage that we've had even when the industry was booming. We've also got a skills gap as well. What do you understand the difference between the skills shortage and the skills gap?
Well, the skills gap really is people going on this journey and making sure that they're up with modern techniques and requirements, and that gap comes from there, and then the shortage is quite simply a lack of resource. I think what's really important, as Joe touched on, is capturing the next talent and the millennials, but equally it's around ensuring that we don't lose people from the industry, which historically has happened, particularly around times of recession, and that those in the industry are functioning at the highest possible level.
Yeah, thanks, John. So, Charlotte, from your perspective, that balance of skills gap and skills shortage, which do you see as the bigger issue, or are both equally important?
I think, yeah, both are equally important. I think that there are hundreds of thousands and near enough 1 million people that are going to retire from the industry within the next 5 to 10 years. And I believe that we need to harness these skills of these personnel leaving the industry and offer lecturing, training opportunities for them to come into our offsite manufacturing facilities and train our younger generations. Yes, that's what I believe we need to do.
Yeah, thanks, Charlotte. We've got another question for the audience as we which is coming up on the screen in front of you, which is about this issue about how do we assess the skills of employees and suppliers. So, for example, how do we do a training needs analysis to understand where the skills gaps are? We heard for example, from from Charlotte, the need to upskill designers, but also to upskill construction managers as well. But do we have a way of doing that across the industry which is consistent? And if you're a contractor wanting to work with a supplier, how do you know if they've got the skills or not? How do we assess the skills which are in the supply chain to us? And whilst the audience is answering that, Dominic, a question for yourself. You're putting forward candidates to the industry. How do you know that they're any good?
Well, yeah, it's a good question again. We have always used guys from tier 1 main contractors on a management level. And moving a guy over from a traditional build school with Morgan Sindall or Galliford Try, Wilmot Dixon, or whoever it may be, moving them straight over into offsite construction has at times proved difficult. A guy who's got a major project mentality and a tier 1 main contractor background in terms of process and procedure doesn't necessarily cross over into offsite straight away with ease, and so we've used the school in recent times and the training modules there to sort of give people a foundation and to help them transition across into the offsite sort of mentality and way of thinking prior to going over. And obviously we've helped develop some modules with you guys, with some of these people, to get that content right so that the crossover works well. So yeah, we put people through the training modules before they start with a client of ours in offsite, and we give them what we call the Build Space Offsite Passport, which is basically a sort of it shows that they've been through the 10 modules that we've helped to be part of.
That's good. And Charlotte, you were talking about working with the local colleges and universities as well. How do you go out forming those relationships?
I think it is about brand awareness and being really live on social media, so your brand is out there. And then we tend to get a lot of people coming to us, and then, yeah, basically through brand awareness, I believe it is, and being out there. Yep,
excellent. I know there's a lot of construction colleges out there as well, and we've got to work with those construction colleges. I know that an organisation we've been collaborating with, the Construction Scotland Innovation Centre, have had a project called Offsite Ready for upskilling colleges. I think it's really important, and recommend anybody who's wanting to reach out to colleges. Offsite Ready is a good place to start. John, do you see a skills shortage when you're speaking with clients? Does that come out as a blocker to them thinking about offsite solutions?
Yeah, very much so. I think as much as on the contractor side and the supply chain side, we worry about our own skills. Client sides, there's definitely a lack of skills and training. And with the government's presumption in favour of offsite, there's a lot of people clamouring to understand what it is. I think some of the challenges we see in there is again, people getting pulled to a solution before they've actually worked out what the problem statement is. And that's a really, really simple thing. But yeah, I'd advocate that whilst not necessarily these modules being aimed at client side, that they undertake them, because the more you understand the opposite side of the solution, then it becomes easy to get value out of it.
Yeah, thanks, John. Joe, just thinking about professional bodies, the likes of CIOB, the likes of RICS, the likes of the Chartered of Purchasing Supply, the likes of REBA. How are you engaging with such organisations around the offsite and the skills agenda with those organisations?
Well, I think it varies really. I think a lot of those organisations, you think about RICS, REBA, have been very much at the table and are aware of offsite and the drive towards offsite. And obviously RICS have been involved around standardisation and warranties with BOPAS and NHBC, amongst others. REBA obviously have worked on the GFMA overlay for the plan of works for the last couple of versions there. I think if you think about skills and how those bodies can assist, so REBA with the architect and design community, there possibly is a lot more that we as a sector and groups such as Build Offsite, the Offsite School and others can do to work closer with those groups to enable a more ingrained and a more kind of natural approach to access to offsite training, offsite knowledge, so on and so forth. I think there's a distinct gap between how those professional bodies approach offsite from their particular discipline, but how that then maybe relates to, we think back to the last slide and I think comments John made about how all of those disciplines need to connect and need to work alongside each other. Actually, how does the role of the architect need in an offsite project need to fit alongside the role of a QS or a cost consultant is something that I think the sector needs to look at addressing.
Thanks, Joe. I've just put in the chat, everybody. The smartconstructionnetwork.org.uk has recently been launched, and that's, if you wanted to reach out to local organisations, local universities, local colleges who have expertise in this area, who have those sandpits for innovation and R&D and what have you, go and have a look on there. You'll find an interactive map which will enable you to identify the college or the university which is closest to you, which are part of that Smart Construction Network. So that's smartconstructionnetwork.org.uk. Okay, just going back, looking at the Menti screen there, we see that only a couple of you are using the school to assess the skills of your colleagues and also your suppliers. We've got a free training needs analysis in the school around offsite, so please use that. Just need to register yourself. There's no cost of registering. Become a member of the school by doing that. Again, no cost to become a member. You can then go on and do the online assessment, and you'll get an adaptive learning plan comes out of that as well, based upon where you have weaknesses at the moment. So please do use that. For those of you who have your own internal processes, great that we've got a process in place. It's really important that we've got that, because we need to have a common way of assessing skills so we can talk the same language about where those gaps actually are. Because the frustration I have is that we have a talk about the skills shortage and the skills gap, but we often don't know where is the actual gap, what bits of knowledge are actually missing. The training needs assessment that we've got within the school enables you to identify where those gaps in knowledge actually are. So conscious that we've only got about 7 or 8 minutes left with the panel. Just if we move on to the next question, we're going to invite questions from the floor, actually. So what questions do you have for the panel? And there's no doubt back to you, Menti, to type those questions in. But one question we were having before was around health and safety and the drive from Hackett and the like. What technical skills, Joe and John, probably to start with, what technical skills around materials choice and installation of the various materials and systems that we use do we need to get that health and safety bit absolutely right? So first question to Joe, and then move on to John. Yeah.
I think, it's interesting you talk about the products and the materials. I think there's a huge, and thinking back to the last slide, obviously with the majority of people kind of conducting their own in-house kind of assessment and training. I think particularly with SMEs coming to market and trying to drive that innovative culture and the management of the supply chain and support for the supply chain, I think there needs to be, we need to be aware of the standards, regulations, warranty, the awareness around those pieces are embedded in and high up the agenda of all of those in-house training schemes, because as we're seeing, the warranty and regulation and standards landscape is changing regularly, will continue to change, and fantastic that we have new materials, new systems coming to market. But with that brings new regulations, new standards that need to be adhered to, need to be followed. So I think beyond the products and materials, it's the standards that sit behind those and making sure that there's enough training and knowledge around those, and that is across the board.
John, from your perspective.
Yeah, I think when I joined the industry, if you look at facades, there's a relatively limited palette of materials, and over the last 20 years, that palette has exploded greatly, along with the standards and regulations that they're meant to adhere to. And what you see is a lot of design that throws elements together, and it hasn't worked, and that's going in the most horrific way. What offsite and monolith construction enables and leads you to do is become far more predictable in the process you go through, and you move towards product development that is fully tested and fully understood, and that allows you to develop training materials that support that, rather than traditional construction at the moment throws together far too many elements and hopes they work. So yeah, it's two-pronged really. One is what Joe talks about, quality and training, and embedding that in that process, but equally moving to more predictable processes.
Thanks, John. There's a question coming up, Charlotte, which is probably best for yourself. What apprenticeship standards are you seeing out there for new employees around Offsite?
There are a lot of apprenticeship standards out there, but I believe there is nothing at the minute truly standardized, and that's what we are doing here is with our Skills Academy, is we realize where these gaps are, and we're working together as collaborations with industry partners in order to develop a standard set of standards for apprenticeships. And I believe that we need more Offsite academies developed with local manufacturing facilities and colleges, and involving NHBC, LABC warranty providers in order to develop a true set of standards out there for new employees. And we'd welcome anyone to come down should they have an interest in starting in the industry, and we'll work with them on the new standards and where they want to be in the industry.
Thanks for that. Joe, do you want to come in on that one as well? Obviously, and I've been on various site visits around Dudley College and other colleges around the country, which seem to be the future. What do you see as the question come around about? We need a set of relevant apprenticeship routes. The ones that are out there currently don't meet MMC needs. What is being developed right now? What do you see?
Well, I think you're right. You've touched upon Dudley. There's work happening up in Leeds as well, in the Yorkshire region, and I know the work that was shown at the start. Lang O'Rourke obviously developing this off-site apprenticeship for logistics operatives. But again, I don't think by any stretch is it across the board. An anecdote from my nephew's just started at a technology college doing a PM course. Look at the syllabus. There's absolutely zero on there about Offsite and MMC and DFMA. And so it's a very mixed bag. And I think it's got to be from school level up. There needs to be wider awareness and support for Offsite methods, techniques, and how we embed that into the curriculum is a challenge that we all face, because yes, there's some great in-house examples. There's some great colleges that are doing some fantastic work, but it's very much in isolation rather than the norm at the moment.
John, do you want to take the question? It says, do you see a future where tradespeople are based in a workshop facility or replaced through technology rather than based on site?
I think the reality is there'll be a mix. I think automation is coming in every facet of our life, and so that's part of it. But there'll always be a place for people on site. There's always be work to do on site, and skills change. So I think it's a mixed answer really.
Yeah, I'd agree with you as well. There's a question to the earlier panel, which I didn't get a chance to read out, which was about the retrofitting agenda, when you've got to work out that we've got to insulate so many more homes, if we're going to hit the standards that we require by 2040, 2050 and the like. And it's quite hard to automate the retrofitting of all the Victorian and mid-war housing stock that we have across the UK. And I heard a stat the other day.
I don't think traditional trades need to worry because there's not enough of them. So there'll always be a demand for people who've got skills in the current market.
Yeah, Charlotte, do you want to come in on that as well? Because clearly, you're investing and automating production. Does that take away from the need for trades on site?
Again, I think both there will be. We will see a larger emergence of tradespeople in factory floors. There's going to be hundreds of thousands of jobs available in manufacturing facilities, but also there will be the need for on-site tradespeople. Whereas those skills might change a little. We'll have maybe specialists in logistics and handling and transport. But yes, there will be both, but I definitely see a larger increase of tradespeople on the shop floor. And I believe this is the way to go because it's a far safer environment, reducing the risk of manual handling and a far safer place to be.
Brilliant. Just picking up on the question, in the light of the skills gap and an aging industry, what training courses are available for CPD of existing staff? Dominic, you're doing this with many of your candidates at the moment through the school. Anything else you want to say?
I mean, there's loads of with you guys. It starts from design and works all the way through to final delivery. But I think there is a little bit of interest with CITB and stuff at the moment as well. And I think that if there was a way that we could get adoption from CITB to create an industry-wide standard for offsite construction, that would be a real sort of shot in the arm for the sector. I mean, if we could get some real wider recognition there, then that would really help take things forward.
Interesting. Yeah. CITB co-funded the modules that we're developing or the developing and launching today, and you're quite right. In total, we've got for offsite and modern methods of construction, we've got 22 CPD accredited modules in total. We're launching 6 today, but we've got the other 16. My maths is good. Are still there, which is great, and they've all been refreshed over the last 6 months as well. So do go to supplychainschool.co.uk. Got my plug in there to access all of those. We've gone through many a conference recently. We're not talking about the B word, but it's come back. So Charlotte, as an operations director, how do you see MMC with a no-deal Brexit in terms of material availability, such as timber? All the COVID took over from Brexit. What can I say?
Yeah, I know. It is going to be a nightmare, but I think what is going to help in aiding us all sourcing locally, which is needed to help an economic downturn that we are going to undergo. And yes, I encourage everyone to buy more locally, but we've started to develop as a company partnerships with local suppliers. And I think that's key. We all need to look what's around us. It may be a little more expensive, but that is going to be the safe place to turn.
Yep, absolutely. John, do you want to come in on that as well? Are you getting this question from clients about material availability?
Yeah, I'd advocate Charlotte's view that the more we can buy locally and across our own supply chains, which adds security. There'll always be a requirement for imports, but if we can keep those to the necessary, then that's really good for the UK economy, I think.
Yeah. Thanks for that, John. Joe, can I come in on this one? Because I know you've done, Build Offsite done a lot of work around warranty and insurance. MMC projects covered by NHBC warranty, yeah? There's a question there. What's your view around that? You've got your own BOPAS scheme, I believe, and there's NHBC as well. Yeah, do you want to just explain a little bit?
I mean, obviously BOPAS and NHBC, the warranties have been very much focused on housing, residential projects at the moment. There is potential, and I think there is a need for that to be developed further than the housing sector, and that is conversations that need to take place in terms of the. Obviously, some of the perceptions of offsite that still exist within the uneducated, maybe around kind of the connotations of prefab and so on and so forth, that we're seeing with the precision manufactured homes that are being built. The vast majority of those going through the BOPAS and HBC scheme will last for a minimum of 60 years, for a minimum of 2 mortgage terms. And if they last 60 years, they're going to last 100 plus years once you get to that phase. So I think it's about, obviously there's been work within Mark Farmer and with BOPAS and HBC Premier Guarantee about a standardised unified warranty scheme for the sector. That effort continues, and I think, as Dom alluded to, if we can get those industry-wide standards, that will only help drive the skills, the training, the recruitment that needs to take place to continue to grow the sector.
Thanks, Joe. Charlotte, do you want to come on that? Because you mentioned briefly about the need to engage with insurers. As a modular manufacturer, how do you tackle insurance issues?
In terms, we've been involved in insurers at early doors. So we're bringing the, even when we haven't got a project that has started, we just have a design idea, we bring LHBC into our facility and work with them. And I think working with these providers early doors allows them to be involved, and it stops any quality issues arising and taking its time to come through and their approval process. So involving warranty providers at the earliest stage possible would be my advice.
Thanks, Charlotte. I'm just specifically answering one of the questions which is coming up on the panel at the moment. It's saying about the skills gap and the need once once you've chosen your materials and your systems, there needs to be a thorough knowledge and understanding of logistics capability. I would totally agree with that. We've developed CPD modules for logistics managers to try to explain about the differences that they'll need to do in their job about, in essence, moving around larger modules, and you can go on the sample and sample that this afternoon at 2:30 through to 3:15. So there's a offsite for logistics which you can actually go and sample this afternoon. Just another question which has come up. I think John Hanscom, I think you touched on this as well, about specific skills which are transferable from current trades and current professionals. So into the new kind of modern methods of construction world. What skills are transferable?
I think we need to be really careful that we don't throw out the existing skills in the industry, and because they're manifold and understanding quality and process and logistics and all the things and engineering and what have you, they're really important. So it's not about throwing away the skills that are already in the industry, but it's keeping up with the times and making sure that everything's relevant.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay, I think we've got time just to deal with just one last question. Panel question to you all. So if you were going to recommend the audience to do something regarding upskilling their workforce, what would you recommend? Dominic?
Definitely promoting the apprenticeships that are starting to kick around. If we get in young with the next wave, the next generation of construction professionals, that would be great. And as Charlotte mentioned before, at the back end of people's working career, with so many people dropping off or due to drop off in the next couple of years, harnessing that know-how and making sure that it doesn't drop off without being put to use.
Yep, excellent. Charlotte, if you had to say one thing in the skills agenda?
I think our planet is the one I'd like to touch on, because I think we need to get all and everyone that we can on courses around zero carbon sustainability, and to ensure that our planet is here for next future generations, not only the construction skills.
I second that. I think that's really, really important. Yeah. If you want to go onto the supply chain school, you'll find lots of modules there about understanding about biodiversity, understanding about carbon, how to embody carbon, etc. But also specific things. If you're based in Wales, for example, you'll find e-learning modules which investigate the well-being of future generations. That, for example, what's driving government policymakers as well, and how relevant is that to the industry. Joe, if you're recommending to the audience something to be doing around skills, what would you say?
I think it's, and Charlotte mentioned it, I think it's about how, if you're manufacturers, if you've got your own facility, about how you're marketing and branding and attracting local talent, and working with local councils and LEPs to drive jobs in the region, etc. And then I think, just as organisations and as a sector, better knowledge around the resource that's already available, whether that's Offsite Ready or today the Offsite for Everyone launch and the resource that the school have available. I think a lot of what's needed is already out there in the public domain. It's just knowing about it and knowing how to use it.
I think you're right, Jack. There is no shortage of knowledge out there. It's about packaging it up and accessing what's actually in the marketplace, isn't there? Yeah. All of our knowledge is freely available. It's been paid for by a combination of CITB co-funding it along with our 100 partners who fund the school every year. And a big thanks for them doing that. That's clients, it's contractors, and it's major tier one suppliers as well. who all see the need to engage. In fact, there was a question on the panel saying, how do main contractors engage with their supply chains to help SMEs understand more about the offsite agenda? Well, this initiative was started by those major contractors coming together, realizing there is a skills gap and a skills shortage within their supply chains around modern methods of construction. And if we and they are going to get better at building housing, infrastructure, and the assets which are all around us, we need to get better skills there. What drives us as an organisation is very similar to what drives Charlotte as an organisation, where our mission is to enable a more sustainable built environment, which is very, very important indeed. What do we mean by sustainability? Well, clearly, it's the environmental impacts of sustainability. It's the reducing those impacts and taking on board the messages about net zero, but also from a biodiversity point, being net positive in actual fact, net gain around biodiversity. But then also in a social arena as well, we see policymakers, public sector, planning organisations asking the developers and the clients to actually ensure that we are creating more social value with the building projects that we're involved in. So we need to understand the social drivers as well. The school can help you around that. But if we're going to get the social and environmental pillars right, we've got to get the economic pillars right. We can't deliver those outcomes to the outcomes we want, a greener, more sustainable building built more productively. We can only do that by building differently. And that's where we've got to be looking at modern methods of construction. And coming full circle back to Mark's presentation right at the beginning, when we talked about the modern methods of construction hierarchy, and we've got that definitions hierarchy, it is really, really important. We've got the 7 levels of modern methods of construction there for you to look at, and we all consider the full volumetric approach, the level 1 first of all, and that's which sticks in many people's minds. But it's not just about a full modular. We've got so many other systems which are out there, which are panelized systems through to modular components that we might be using, or even just as we move forward and we're looking at how we're going to be using robots or artificial intelligence and using technology to improve the way that we build. But let's not forget as well that we've done a lot of work with organizations like the Lean Construction Institute. By employing lean construction principles in the way that we assemble our modules and the way that we use modern methods of construction, we can drive tremendous benefits as well. So in summary, yes, we want to build a more sustainable world, and to do that we've got to build differently. Supply Chain School is here to help you.